There are 5 countries so feared, so brutal, so twisted in their actions that deep down, you wouldn't mind seeing them go up in flames. From weaponized surveillance and genocide to nuclear threats and hacked elections, these regimes have pushed the world to the edge. But what if we told you their collapse has already begun? Right now, the cracks are forming, economies unraveling, armies defecting, rebellions rising. These aren't theories, they're happening in real time. And if these regimes fall, the world won't be safer, it could explode. Because when tyrants lose control, they don't surrender, they strike back. This isn't just about revenge or justice, this is about survival. This kind of in-depth geopolitical storytelling is exactly why we created Fall of Nations. If you're interested in more content like this and want to support the mission, consider subscribing. Now, let's take a closer look at the 5 so-called evil empires on the brink of collapse. China, the surveillance superpower. China wants you to believe it's unstoppable, the second largest economy on Earth, 1 billion+ citizens marching in lockstep, a technological powerhouse ready to dominate the 21st century. But behind the gleaming skyscrapers and high-speed trains lies a different reality. Xi Jinping has created the most sophisticated surveillance state in human history. In Xinjiang alone, over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in what UN investigators have called crimes against humanity. Facial recognition cameras track citizens' every move. Social credit scores determine who can travel, get loans, or even send their children to good schools. The Great Firewall blocks information the regime doesn't want its people to see. But the system that was meant to protect China's ruling elite is starting to crack. In 2024, China's property sector, which accounts for nearly 30% of its GDP, continued its catastrophic implosion. 90 million empty apartments now threaten to wipe out the life savings of hundreds of millions of Chinese families. The numbers are staggering. According to Statista, Chinese household wealth tied to real estate sits at 70%, compared to just 25% in America. When those investments collapse, so will public faith in the Communist Party. But the housing crisis is just the beginning. China's birth rate has fallen to a record low of 6.77 births per 1,000 people, less than half the rate needed for population replacement. Despite abandoning the one-child policy, young Chinese couples simply aren't having babies. Housing costs are too high, education is too expensive, and work pressure is too intense. The demographic time bomb is ticking. By 2100, China's population could shrink to around 600 million, less than half its current size. A country can't grow economically with a rapidly declining population. It's basic math. But here's what makes China's situation truly dangerous: water. China is literally running out of water. According to China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment, over 80% of groundwater in major agricultural regions is polluted, much of it too contaminated for any use. The North China Plain, home to 400 million people, faces such severe water shortages that the World Resources Institute identifies it as one of the most water-stressed regions on Earth. Water tables are dropping by 1 meter per year. Without water, China's farms and factories will grind to a halt. Cities will become unlivable. You can print money, but you can't print rainfall. The CCP knows this crisis is existential. That's why China's severe water scarcity is influencing its management of transboundary rivers, potentially leading to restricted water flow to neighboring countries as it prioritizes its own desperate needs. But the most shocking vulnerability in China's entire system? Food security. Despite all its economic power, China has a deadly secret. It cannot feed its own people. China is increasingly dependent on foreign food to survive. In 2023 alone, it imported $215 billion worth of food, according to China Power. Its food self-sufficiency has plummeted from 94% in 2000 to just 66% in 2020, with experts warning it could drop further to 59% by 2030. If a war, pandemic, or climate disaster were to disrupt these imports, the result could be catastrophic, turning COVID-era empty grocery shelves into a distant memory. Throughout Chinese history, dynasties have fallen when they failed to feed the population. The Chinese Communist Party knows this well. It rose to power during a period of widespread hunger. A country that can't feed itself is perpetually vulnerable, no matter how many aircraft carriers it builds. As these multiple crises converge, Xi Jinping faces an impossible choice: loosening control to save the economy or tightening control to prevent instability. Either path leads to disaster. When China falls, it won't be because of military defeat. It will collapse from within as its economic miracle reverses, its water runs dry, and its people lose faith in a system that promised prosperity but delivered surveillance instead. And when that happens, the shockwaves will be felt everywhere. North Korea, the vanishing kingdom. North Korea is disappearing, not from war, not from an uprising, but from something far worse, a slow-motion demographic collapse that even Kim Jong-un can't control. The cracks are showing, and you won't believe what will truly erase North Korea from the map. On December 5, 2023, the world saw something no one expected. Kim Jong-un, one of the most ruthless dictators alive, on the verge of tears. Speaking to a room full of mothers in Pyongyang, he begged North Korean women to have more children. A dictator doesn't do that unless something is very, very wrong. On January 1, 2024, Kim officially declared North Korea's declining birth rate a national emergency. According to South Korean intelligence reports cited by Yonhap News Agency, he made population growth a top national priority for 2024, placing it right alongside his nuclear weapons program. Why the sudden panic? Because the countdown to North Korea's disappearance has already begun. According to the UN Population Division's 2023 data, North Korea's fertility rate has dropped to 1.79 births per woman, far below the 2.1 needed to sustain a stable population. The CIA's 2024 World Factbook backs this up, confirming that every year more North Koreans are dying than being born. And it's only getting worse. March 2024 projections from the Lowy Institute predict that by 2034, North Korea's population will begin an irreversible decline. By 2050, the UN Demographics Unit estimates its working-age population will shrink by 20%. By 2100, North Korea could lose half its people. But here's the shocking paradox. A desperately poor nation is experiencing the birth rates of rich countries. That's not how this is supposed to work. Poor countries typically have high fertility rates. So why is North Korea breaking every rule of population science? Because when the government's food distribution system collapsed during the 1990s famine, survival fell on black markets and underground trade networks. Women became the breadwinners. With men forced to report to useless state jobs, women took over the economy, launching the Jangmadang markets that now dominate North Korea's economy. What started as illegal food trading grew into an underground commercial network spanning the entire country. It was a revolution, but not the kind Kim Jong-un feared. Now, North Korean women are making a rational choice. They're refusing to bring children into a country with no future. Each pregnancy means economic disaster for families already on the edge. Mi Jin, who escaped North Korea in 2019, offered a window into this reality. In our neighborhood markets, the women ran everything. We called ourselves grassroots capitalists behind officials' backs. Another defector, Sun Hee, explained the brutal calculus. Pregnancy means losing your market stall for months. Women would pay 2 months' earnings for illegal Chinese birth control rather than lose their livelihood. The regime's desperate attempts to reverse this trend reveal just how little they understand the crisis. They've banned contraception, criminalized abortion, offered financial incentives, and even created mandatory matchmaking events for unmarried employees. But they've missed the fundamental reality. In a country where the average state salary is just $5 a month, even the government's new incentive of extra food rations twice a year for families with 3 or more children does little to help, especially when black market dealings can bring in 10 times as much every week. With plummeting birth rates, what happens to a military state that can't find new soldiers? The Korean People's Army, with 1.2 million active personnel, has long protected the Kim dynasty, but that military machine is disappearing before our eyes. Physical standards have deteriorated so dramatically that minimum height requirements for male recruits have dropped from 5'3" to just 4'9", evidence of how malnutrition has literally shrunk the next generation. In fact, adult male defectors under 30 are reportedly almost 10 centimeters, about 4 inches, shorter than South Korean 18-year-olds, a stark biological imprint of a nation in decline. A defector who served in an artillery unit near the DMZ from 2013 to 2020 described the absurd reality. "We spent 4 months a year farming, not training. We were soldiers who farmed, not farmers who occasionally trained." Even North Korea's prized nuclear program faces a personnel crisis. The specialized scientists needed for missile development requires years of advanced training. As the educated population shrinks, finding qualified candidates becomes impossible. Kim Jong-un has spent his entire rule focused on nuclear weapons as the key to regime survival. But the real existential threat wasn't from external invasion. It was from the demographic time bomb ticking within his own borders. North Korea won't vanish overnight. The process will be gradual, marked by increasing instability, economic deterioration, and territorial contraction. But the trajectory is clear and increasingly irreversible. A country that once threatened the world with nuclear apocalypse now faces a different kind of extinction, not with a bang, but with the quiet absence of children's laughter. Iran, reaping what it sowed. March 18, 2025, Tehran, Iran. The once proud capital of a nation that dreamed of dominating the Middle East now struggles to keep its lights on. This is Iran reaping what it sowed, a bitter harvest of catastrophic miscalculations that have brought it to the brink of total collapse. "We lost, we badly lost, we blew it." These devastating words weren't spoken by some Western analyst or Iranian dissident. They came directly from a high-ranking commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps during a closed-door meeting that was never meant to reach the public. When the elite guardians of the revolution are privately admitting defeat, you know something catastrophic is unfolding. Iran's collapse isn't coming from foreign invasion or military defeat. The Islamic Republic is reaping what it sowed, a perfect storm of consequences for decades of mismanagement, corruption, and catastrophic strategic blunders. Let's start with perhaps the most mind-boggling paradox of Iran's downfall. Imagine sitting on an ocean of energy while your citizens freeze in the dark. That's the absurd reality in Iran today. Across the country, schools, universities, banks, and government offices operate on severely reduced schedules. Major highways and shopping malls regularly plunge into darkness without warning. The natural gas deficit, a staggering 260 to 350 million cubic meters daily, has created an energy crisis that would be laughable if it weren't so devastating. Just let that sink in for a moment. Iran possesses the second largest natural gas reserves on the planet, yet its president recently had to make a humiliating public apology while Iran's energy officials were literally begging Iranians to lower their home temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius just to survive the winter. And the domino effect is utterly devastating. Manufacturing output has plummeted by up to 50% as the government frantically shuts down industrial plants to divert energy to homes. Steel production has potentially collapsed by half, with some sources reporting even more dramatic declines. Without steel, Iran can't maintain its military equipment, repair its crumbling infrastructure, or sustain its defense industry. This isn't just an energy crisis, it's a national security meltdown happening in real time. Meanwhile, Iran's economy isn't just struggling, it's in complete freefall. According to the Heritage Foundation's 2025 Index of Economic Freedom, Iran languishes at a staggering 169th out of 184 countries, buried among the world's most failed, fractured, and war-ravaged states. In the Middle East and North Africa region, it ranks dead last, 14th out of 14, cementing its place as the region's most economically repressed nation. But the most heartbreaking statistic reveals the human toll of this economic apocalypse. More than a third of all Iranians have plunged below the poverty line, while inflation has exceeded a staggering 40% for 5 consecutive years. Picture that, half of your purchasing power vanishing in just half a decade with no relief in sight. You're probably wondering how a nation sitting on some of the world's largest oil reserves could possibly find itself in such dire economic straits. The answer reveals how Iran is reaping what it sowed through perhaps the most disastrous strategic gamble in its history. Between 2018 and 2023, despite crippling sanctions, Iran somehow managed to earn a staggering $253 billion in oil revenues. That's money that could have rebuilt crumbling infrastructure, modernized the energy sector, or provided relief to struggling citizens. Instead, somewhere between $30 to $50 billion, a mind-boggling sum, was funneled into Syria to prop up the Assad regime. Another $20+ billion went to building proxy forces across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various Shia militias in Iraq. Nearly a quarter of Iran's precious oil revenue was squandered on geopolitical ventures that have now gone up in smoke. And here's the truly devastating part. With Syria's change of government, Iran's carefully constructed land bridge to its proxies has been completely severed. Now Iran is reaping what it sowed. The billions spent building influence have essentially evaporated overnight. But if you thought Iran's current situation was dire, what lies ahead is truly nightmarish. A demographic time bomb that threatens to erase the Islamic Republic from the map entirely. Iran is aging at a pace that demographers find almost impossible to comprehend. According to Iran's own National Population Research Institute, the country's 90.6 million strong population is aging 5 times faster than it's growing, a rate of decline with few parallels in human history. By 2050, 1/3 of all Iranians will be over 60, a threefold increase from 2021. But even that alarming statistic doesn't capture the full horror of what's coming. Interior Minister Eskandar Momeni recently issued a warning that sent shockwaves through the government. Iran's population could shrink by more than half over the next 75 years. Let that sink in. The Islamic Republic isn't just facing decline, it's facing potential extinction as a nation. For the first time in the Islamic Republic's history, terrifying questions are emerging about whether members of the regime's hard base, the ideologically committed supporters who form the backbone of its security apparatus, will continue to defend the system when the next wave of unrest inevitably erupts. The parallels to Syria's collapse are impossible to ignore. It was the demoralization and abandonment of Assad's security forces that led to the downfall of the Ba'athist regime. Iran's leadership is watching the same nightmare scenario unfold in slow motion. One retired Revolutionary Guard member, speaking anonymously, delivered a devastating assessment. "We sacrificed everything for the revolution. And what do we have to show for it? We can't even keep the lights on." As Iran's regime begins to buckle, intelligence agencies warn that extremist elements within the IRGC might do something reckless, very reckless. We're talking about potential last-ditch attacks on U.S. forces in the region or strikes on critical oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, acts that could ignite a regional war overnight. The Islamic Republic is caught in a perfect storm of catastrophic proportions: an energy crisis, economic collapse, demographic death spiral, and evaporating legitimacy, all while facing unprecedented international pressure and looming military threats. When systems are as fundamentally broken as Iran's, even small sparks can ignite an unstoppable conflagration. What we're witnessing isn't just a nation in crisis, it's the final death throes of a revolutionary regime that has exhausted its ideological, economic, and demographic resources. Venezuela, paradise lost. Venezuela should be one of the richest countries on earth. It sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, a staggering 304 billion barrels, more than even Saudi Arabia. Its fertile soil, temperate climate, and abundant water resources should make it an agricultural powerhouse. Instead, Venezuela has become a case study in how to destroy a nation from within. Once the wealthiest country in Latin America, Venezuela now ranks among the poorest. How did a country with such immense natural wealth fall so far, so fast? The answer begins with Hugo Chavez, who came to power in 1999 promising to use Venezuela's oil wealth to lift the poor. When oil prices soared in the 2000s, his government spent lavishly on social programs, nationalized industries, and expanded state control over the economy. But beneath the surface, the foundations were crumbling. Corruption became endemic. State-owned companies, including the oil giant PDVSA, were staffed with political loyalists rather than qualified managers. Maintenance was neglected. Investment in new technologies stopped. When Chavez died in 2013, his hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, inherited a system already on the brink. As oil prices plummeted, the house of cards collapsed. The numbers are staggering. According to the IMF, Venezuela's economy has shrunk by 80% since 2013, the largest contraction of any country not at war in modern history. Hyperinflation reached an almost unimaginable 130,000% in 2018. Even after multiple currency redenominations that lopped zeros off the bolivar, inflation remains among the highest in the world in 2025. The human toll has been catastrophic. According to a 2023 survey by the country's major universities, 82% of Venezuelans live in poverty, with 53% in extreme poverty. Food insecurity affects 92% of households. The minimum wage, about $5 per month, buys less than a week's worth of food. In fact, the basic food basket of 60 essential items now costs over $550, meaning it would take more than 150 monthly salaries just to survive. Venezuela's health system, once a model for Latin America, has virtually collapsed. Hospitals lack even basic supplies like antibiotics, surgical gloves, and clean water, according to Médicos por la Salud. 70% of Venezuela's hospitals experience power outages lasting at least 6 hours in 2024. Maternal mortality has increased by 65% since 2015. Malaria, once almost eradicated, has surged by 400% according to the WHO. Vaccine-preventable diseases like measles and diphtheria have returned. The result has been the largest migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere's modern history. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans, more than one-quarter of the country's pre-crisis population, have fled, according to the UN's latest data. But amidst this catastrophe, something remarkable is happening. The collapse of the state has forced Venezuelans to create their own solutions. A parallel economy using dollars, cryptocurrencies, and barter has emerged. Communities have organized to provide services the government no longer can. In Caracas, neighborhood councils now handle everything from garbage collection to security. In Maracaibo, local engineers have built microgrids to provide electricity when the national grid fails. Throughout the country, abandoned factories have been repurposed as community centers, and there are signs that Maduro's grip is weakening. According to leaked internal polling from March 2025, the regime's support has fallen to just 18%. The military, long the regime's backbone, is experiencing defections at record rates. For the first time, mid-level officers are openly discussing a post-Maduro future. Oil production, the regime's lifeline, continues its catastrophic decline. PDVSA now produces barely 892,000 barrels per day, down from 3.5 million at its peak. Industry experts say that without massive investment and technical expertise, Venezuela's oil infrastructure may suffer irreversible damage. Even Maduro's international allies are showing fatigue. China, which has loaned Venezuela over $60 billion since 2007, has drastically reduced new funding. Russia, distracted by its own crises, has scaled back support. Cuba, itself struggling economically, can no longer provide the intelligence and security assistance Maduro has relied on. The pressure is building. In January 2025, protests erupted in 16 of Venezuela's 23 states after another round of power cuts. Unlike previous demonstrations, these included traditionally pro-government neighborhoods. For the first time, workers from state-owned companies joined the protest. Maduro responded with familiar tactics, violence, and repression. But according to human rights observers, security forces in several cities refused orders to fire on protesters, a significant crack in the regime's control apparatus. The question is no longer if Venezuela's regime will collapse, but when, and what comes after. The country's reconstruction will require not just economic reforms, but rebuilding institutions hollowed out by decades of corruption and mismanagement. History shows that transitions from authoritarian rule are rarely smooth. Venezuela, with its militarized society and proliferation of armed groups, faces particular risks of prolonged instability. The international community's approach to a post-Maduro Venezuela will be crucial in determining whether the country can recover or descends further into chaos. As Venezuela teeters on the brink, one thing is clear: the collapse of Maduro's regime won't be the end of Venezuela's crisis. It will be the beginning of a new and equally challenging chapter in the country's history. Russia, the Hollow Empire. Russia is in trouble, big trouble. You've probably heard that Putin's Russia is a superpower on the rise, a military force to be reckoned with, an economic powerhouse fueled by endless energy resources. Well, this story is completely falling apart. What we're about to share with you isn't just speculation or wishful thinking. These are cold, hard facts that reveal the truth about Russia's unstoppable decline. A collapse happening in real time before our eyes. Buckle up. Some of these facts are so shocking you might think they're made up. They're not, like how Putin's own TV propagandist suggested he resign on state television, or how Russia's entire emergency fund will vanish by fall 2025. You'll see why China is already relabeling Russian cities with Chinese names and why experts increasingly worry about who controls the world's largest nuclear arsenal as Russia unravels. But let's start with the most humiliating moment in recent Russian history. In August 2024, Ukraine did something that would have seemed insane just 2 years earlier. They invaded Russia. Not with some massive army either. Just 300 soldiers wearing blue tape on their arms crossed the border at 8 a.m. Within 24 hours, Ukrainian forces were racing towards Sudzha, a town 6 miles inside Russia. 3 days in, they'd pushed to Kreveno, 13 miles past the border. By the end of August, Ukraine controlled about 500 square miles of Russian territory. A nuclear superpower, the country with the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, couldn't stop a few hundred Ukrainian soldiers from capturing its territory. If that sounds bad, remember what happened to Russia's once mighty navy. In the Black Sea, Ukraine has destroyed or severely damaged over 33% of Russia's naval force, including its flagship, the Moskva. The truly jaw-dropping part? Ukraine doesn't even have a navy to speak of. They're sinking Russian warships with makeshift sea drones controlled by operators sitting in basements hundreds of miles away. The Black Sea Fleet that was supposed to enforce a blockade on Ukraine is now hiding behind the Crimean Bridge, afraid to venture into open water. The report figures are staggering. According to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, Russian troop losses since February 2022 have amounted to almost 1 million, encompassing those killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Even if that's high, independent sources confirm at least 106,000 Russians have died in Ukraine as of May 2025. That's more soldiers than Russia lost in 10 years fighting in Afghanistan back in the 1980s. In fact, it's more than Russia lost in all its wars since World War II combined. But here's where things get really interesting. While Russia's military is getting demolished on the battlefield, something even more unprecedented is happening inside Russia itself. In Russia, criticizing Putin can get you thrown out a window, literally. That's what makes the events of September 22, 2024 so extraordinary. Vladimir Solovyov, Putin's top TV propagandist, the man awarded the prestigious Order of Honor from Putin himself, went completely off script during his primetime show on Channel 1 Russia. While discussing Ukrainian attacks near Russia's western borders, he suddenly said, "A resignation is necessary." Did Putin's most loyal mouthpiece just suggest that Putin needs to resign? On state TV? The one Putin controls? The studio fell silent. His co-host froze. Someone gasped audibly in the background. This wasn't a one-off blunder. When the regime's loudest cheerleaders start hedging their bets, you know the ship is sinking. And it's not just the elites who are turning on Putin. For years, Russians who protested the regime disappeared into prisons. Speaking out meant losing everything. Something fundamental has shifted. In the village of Ogovka, near Ukraine, residents wrote an open letter to Putin himself. "We ask you to end this cursed war," they wrote. "We've been living in hell over the past 3 months." Regular Russians living inside Russia publicly calling Putin's war cursed, the kind of statement that once guaranteed a one-way ticket to Siberia. Now people are saying it anyway. Behind Russia's political problems lurks an even more devastating reality. Its money is running out. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's emergency money stash, has crashed from $117 billion in 2021 to just $39 billion as of April 2025. Strip away the gold, and that figure shrinks even further. At the current burn rate, experts predict Russia's liquid reserves will be completely gone by fall 2025. Not diminished, gone, empty, zero. And yet Russia plans to spend over $145 billion on defense in 2025 alone. It's like draining your retirement account to buy a tank while your house is burning down. As Russia's financial safety net vanishes, a different kind of crisis is killing the country from within. Russians are drowning in alcohol. Between January and October 2024 alone, Russians guzzled 1.84 billion liters of alcohol, the highest volume recorded since 2017. Vodka, Russia's national drink and silent killer, leads the charge. In just 10 months, Russians downed 620 million liters of the stuff. Russian men now die on average 10.2 years earlier than Russian women, creating one of the worst gender gaps in life expectancy worldwide. A quarter of all male deaths directly trace back to alcohol. This isn't just bad health policy. For centuries, Russian rulers have deliberately fueled mass alcoholism to keep their people docile, obedient, and too drunk to revolt. Putin keeps this tradition alive. As vodka kills individual Russians, it's simultaneously killing Russia's future as a nation. Russia's birth rate has nosedived to its lowest level in 25 years, just 11.1 births per 1,000 people in 2024. The war has turned this slow decline into a demographic emergency. When Putin called up 300,000 men for his partial mobilization in 2022, about 700,000 young Russians, mostly men, immediately fled the country. Not random Russians either. These were doctors, engineers, tech experts, the very people who typically start families and build economies. The math is brutal. For every 12 to 13 people who die in Russia, only about 8 babies are born. This isn't a temporary dip, it's a population extinction event. Putin's desperate solution? Import workers from other countries. Russia now relies on 6 to 14 million migrant workers, mostly from Central Asian countries. But perhaps the most alarming threat of all is one that should keep the entire world awake at night. What happens to the world's largest nuclear arsenal when a country falls apart? Russia maintains approximately 5,889 nuclear warheads as of 2024. The safe maintenance and control of these weapons requires a stable, skilled workforce of nuclear technicians, military officers, and security personnel. As alcoholism, economic collapse, and war decimate Russia's working-age male population, precisely the demographic that staffs these facilities, the risks of accidents, miscalculations, or security breaches grow substantially. What happens if Russia's collapse leads to a power struggle, with different factions fighting for control of nuclear weapons? Or if separatist regions housing nuclear facilities declare independence? The Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 left nuclear weapons scattered across newly independent states. We could be headed for a similar scenario, but in a much more chaotic and dangerous context. Russia isn't just experiencing temporary setbacks, it's facing systemic collapse on multiple fronts simultaneously. Military defeats, economic freefall, demographic disaster, and political instability are converging to create a perfect storm. Putin's regime may be able to maintain control in the short term through repression and propaganda, but the foundations are crumbling, and the collapse, when it comes, will be rapid and dramatic. Conclusion: when evil empires fall. The collapse of these regimes won't mean the end of global threats. It could multiply them. When empires fall, they rarely go quietly. History tells us that dying regimes become more dangerous, not less. As their grip on power weakens, their desperation grows. For China, the crisis of water scarcity combined with a real estate collapse could trigger both internal conflict and external aggression. A desperate CCP might view Taiwan as a distraction from domestic problems, or worse, as a solution to them. North Korea's demographic death spiral creates the nightmare scenario of a nuclear arsenal controlled by an increasingly unstable and desperate regime. What happens when Kim Jong-un realizes his dynasty is ending? Iran's multiple crises could lead hardline IRGC factions to launch desperate attacks on regional targets, triggering a wider Middle Eastern conflict that draws in global powers. Venezuela's collapse could unleash waves of migration that destabilize the entire Western Hemisphere while creating power vacuums that drug cartels and armed groups rush to fill. Russia's decline poses perhaps the greatest threat of all, the world's largest nuclear arsenal in a country experiencing institutional failure, with separatist regions, competing power centers, and a leadership losing its grip on reality. These collapses won't happen in isolation. They'll interact and accelerate each other in unpredictable ways. China's economic problems will impact Russia's already fragile finances. North Korea's instability will affect both Chinese and Russian security calculations. Venezuela's oil production impacts Iran's position in energy markets. The world isn't prepared for multiple simultaneous state failures among nuclear-armed and major regional powers. Our international institutions were designed to manage conflicts between stable states, not to contain the fallout from collapsing empires. But amidst these dangers lie opportunities. The end of these repressive regimes could free hundreds of millions of people. New democratic governments could emerge. Long-frozen conflicts could find resolution. The question isn't whether these regimes will collapse. The evidence points clearly to their unsustainability. The question is how we manage their decline to minimize the dangers and maximize the possibilities for a more stable global order. As we watch these evil empires approach their breaking points, we should remember that what replaces them could be better or much worse. The difference will depend on how prepared the international community is for the coming storms. What do you think? Which of these regimes will fall first? And what will happen when they do? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unfiltered geopolitical insights.